Thank you guys for joining Cerna Podcast Live, episode 3, where we talk about all things ServiceNow. This month, we are talking about solving common problems in automated testing in ServiceNow. We are joined by Sal Costa, Sabrina, Ethridge, and Angel Suon. We're going to get to introductions there in just a little bit. I'm Tim Lee with Cerna Solutions, and again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us on this month's podcast. The reason why we do these live, and I just want to put this out to everyone, is we want to give everyone the chance to ask questions so you can help us kind of guide this conversation as we're going along. So if you see on your GoToWebinar panel, there is a section for questions. Don't wait. If you see anything right now that you want us to talk about that you're hoping that we get to, or just a question that pops in your head throughout the webinar, just open that up right away and go ahead and start asking questions there. And we will definitely, as best as we can, try to incorporate that into our conversation. One of the most common questions we get is this recorded? And this is a podcast. So yes, this is being recorded. We do put this up on YouTube. You can also find this on our website. And if you guys would like to be involved with more of these, if you want to catch these more often to make sure you don't miss them, other than our YouTube channel where you can like and subscribe, and if you hit the bell, you'll get notifications of when these podcasts go up. But you can also go to our LinkedIn site, which is probably our most vocal form of social media right now. So if you guys want to see more news about what we're doing, going over to see us on LinkedIn and following us there. In fact, I went ahead and I'm going to go ahead and put that URL in the chat. So if you want to check us out on LinkedIn, just follow that URL and follow us there, and we'll be posting regular events there that we do similar to what we're doing right now. Right now, let's go ahead and get some introductions out of the way. I'd like you guys, tell me your name, tell me what you do for Cerna, tell me where you are, like your state, and what does your family or loved ones think you do? Like, not what do you do, but what does everyone that you know think you do? Like, I'll give you an example. My wife, I work mostly in marketing for Cerna Solutions, and my wife thinks I fix computers. And I've told her that no one in my company fixes computers, but she's like, well, you're in IT. I'm like, it's not the same. But yeah, Sal, go ahead. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Tim. So yeah, Sal Costa, I'm the principal architect for the product development team. So I do everything from product design and development to pre-sales and marketing and whatever else people need me to do towards the service of creating great products for ServiceNow. I am based out of San Antonio, Texas, so representing the Lone Star State here. And I don't know what my family members tell other people that I do, but I can only imagine that I will get requests for fixing computers. That is a common one. People will definitely ask me to build apps for them for different mobile platforms.
I can see that.
Build websites, and I usually will. If people ask for me to sign a non-disclosure, I just stop the conversation right there. But once they understand the true cost of it, I think people very quickly give up that amateur app developer business idea. But yeah, I get a variety of responses from what I do. But just computers is usually enough to stop the conversation for most people.
All right, Angel.
Hi everyone, I'm Angel Sun. I am out of San Diego, California, and I work on the products team here at Cerna Solutions. That's a good question, Tim. I think I tell people that I just work for an IT company because a lot of people aren't familiar with the details of the consulting and the products that we deal with. And I think they think I am an actual developer and a coder, which I wish I had that honor. I am not technically, savvy at all. But it's nice to know that they probably think of that of me. So that's great.
And Sabrina.
Hey, I'm Sabrina Ethridge. I am in Chicago, Illinois. I am a technical architect / engagement manager for Cerna. I've done both for quite a long time now, and My family mostly thinks I talk on the phone. Well, they think that's what they see me doing most of the day. They think that's all I do is talk on the phone and play games on the computer, but that's not true.
All right, well, excellent. Let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned before, we're talking about specifically about automated testing in the ServiceNow environment, and kind of, Angel, what you were alluding to. ServiceNow is a very specific thing. It's not something that occurs to everybody all the time as having its own unique set of needs, but it's such an important part of everyone's work life right now. It's more and more people are using ServiceNow to permeate their HR department, their marketing. I mean, every kind of aspect of what they're doing, they're starting to use ServiceNow for, which is why it's becoming more important. So let's jump into our first topic, which is what's different about, or what's difficult specifically about testing in ServiceNow. And Sal, I'll go ahead and throw that over to you.
Yeah, this is an incredibly complex question. I think there's a few things which are, I think, the most difficult, or most, maybe you might even say, annoying about testing things in ServiceNow. The first one to me is that I think people's approach to how they develop and use ServiceNow is, I don't want to say immature, because I don't want to rustle anyone's jimmies, but it is not as mature as other development practices. And what I mean by that is, people don't treat it as an engineering project. Because it's very easy to customize, people may think that this is just a configuration, or this is just a setting, and the effort that you would use to test that is not the same as you would if you were building a JavaScript project off from scratch. That's not really true. When you tick a box in ServiceNow, or you change a type in ServiceNow, there's stuff that happens behind the scenes, and that is every bit, in my opinion, is every bit as much engineering as anything else, and needs to be tested, or given the same consideration as you would other types of development there. So I think people's approach, first of all, a lot of people start wrong. A lot of people get it right, but many people do start with that mentality that this is just configuration, and that they're automatically going to just lower the effort because of that. The second thing is because it is easy to change. And one of the things that people don't understand is that that change does have ripples. It does have effects in other areas of the system. And when you are testing, you kind of focus on that one area, but you may not have the resources or the capability to test all the other areas that affects. I know I have at least 100 of those stories, and I'm sure Sabrina does too, where you make a small change here and it affects something on the other side of the system, and you just didn't know about that or think about that, and you just didn't test it. So, in that approach, that things just kind of slip by. That's kind of annoying. And the other thing is, the last thing I'll mention is that ServiceNow is dynamic. If you're developing tests here, you've got your own configuration, but the entire train that it's on is moving as well. So the ServiceNow is upgrading. They're doing patches. They're upgrading the UI, which I'm sure everyone is grateful for, except for the testers, because that means that they've got to change everything about the way they test. And if you're talking about automated testing, that in many cases means rewriting everything. And that can be something that, first off, puts people off of building tests in the first place, but then secondarily will put them off from maintaining them. So those three things to me are what specifically about ServiceNow is difficult, and it may be true of other cloud platforms, but especially true of ServiceNow, just the cadence that they develop and all the other things that I mentioned, the way it's set up. That to me was a kind of showed an immediate need for a better solution.
Now, Sabrina, I know you've done automated testing and manual testing on the ServiceNow platform, as well as some other platforms. What has been your experience with, specifically on ServiceNow?
Well, I think part of it goes to Sal's second point of you're not sure of the ripple effects of what something's going to happen, especially if you've had a platform around for a while and you've had multiple developers in and out of the tool. You have no idea changing this one checkbox, changing this one property is going to downstream affect, 3 or 4 other applications that the developers are no longer with your organization and they can't speak up to that. And you find it in testing, or even worse, after go live to production.
Mm-hmm. What about in terms of, I sometimes I'll hear stories about manual testing taking over a week's worth of full-time equivalent effort just on a single workflow. And that's not the fault of the platform, but it seems to be something that people who are doing manual testing, what do you think is causing that type of frustration for some people?
I just think understanding the different permutations that you have to go through. Like you mentioned, the example I've talked about in the past is you have a workflow with so many different paths that can go down. And it takes a long time to get those documented, long time to get through testing, and then one change, a correction, you find an error in one step, correction, you correct it, and then you end up having to retest everything again from scratch because you want to make sure that single change again didn't impact the whole workflow. So it takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of repeats and effort over and over again, and it can delay your development process and your time to go live just because you're doing that testing many times.
Now, Angel, you and I kind of approach this topic a little less from a technical standpoint than our other two panelists right now.
Right.
But I know that you've worked a lot with our customers, and you've definitely seen kind of the front line of what people are expecting and what are their pain points. What has been surprising for you in terms of how people are talking about their automated testing environment?
Well, I think it's definitely becoming more of a need as opposed to a nice to have previously before. And I think the struggles of manual testing is really starting to catch up with organizations. And as you mentioned, if people are adapting to an automated testing tool, they often run into roadblocks because ServiceNow is so configurable and versatile, and it limits their process. They're unable to scale in that sense. So what we've noticed is just people are just struggling more to just keep up with their flow. As Sabrina mentioned, all the different workflows, all the customizations, and it definitely plays an effect.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I'm going to do right now, let's jump into kind of specifically addressing what some of those problems are. And I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer at the top. Obviously, Cerna Solutions, we do have our own automated testing solution right now called CapIO. And we are going to talk, about both that, being part of our solution to some of these problems, but also just, the general state of, automated testing in ServiceNow on a more, like I said, in more general terms. But, kind of piggybacking off of what we were just saying a second ago in terms of, people thinking this is no longer a nice to have. This is really more of a something that's, much more necessary for these companies. Why do we think it's still hard for them to get this off the ground? Why is it that so many companies are still having some problems fully implementing an automated testing solution?
Well, I think besides the obvious budget, right? But in all seriousness, I think it really is an insignificant investment, and companies fail to realize the ROI they'll be getting in return in such a short amount of time. And once you get past that monetary constraints, I think time and resources are definitely common factors. We've seen organizations with smaller dev teams, and they're often multitasking and involved with several projects while also being accountable for their manual testing contributions. As I think, Tim, I think you mentioned earlier, we were able to help a lot of organizations reduce their efforts. And one company specifically, we reduced them from 40 man hours down to about 45 minutes. And that's pretty significant. And that's over 39 hours that resource can focus onto other initiatives.
Sure.
And once you get past those minor roadblocks, I think you'll definitely see the rewards.
Yeah. What about on a more technical end? I mean, Sal or Sabrina, what are you seeing as far as roadblocks for people just doing something that they know they should be doing, but for some reason have a barrier?
Yeah, it would just if you just Google automated testing, I think you'll see part of the issue is that there's just so much out there. There's so many different solutions and tools that you need to become familiar with and learn that it's often just a barrier to even learn it to get started. As Angel mentioned, like these people are multitasking. Yeah, everyone, people have full-time jobs that are doing development in the first place and probably working on multiple platforms. So learning another language or relearning another language and learning half a dozen tools just to enable automated testing is not an investment that most people can swing. They're already they're already maxed out and they just don't have time for that. So people need a path forward where they can just go to a tool like CapIO or there's other tools out there and build the test and just have it work without having to worry about infrastructure or learning a new language or understanding the different types of testing or any of that. You just need a tool where we can develop a test. That to me was one of the reasons why we built CapIO the way we did, and I'm sure it inspired other people. But specifically for me, we were targeting ServiceNow developers, so that means JavaScript everywhere. We want people to reuse those skills, and for those people that weren't, for those people that were, for most ServiceNow developers, we kind of put them in the middle, right? They're in terms of test development, you're already, if you've got ServiceNow development skills, you're already intermediate at developing the test using CapIO, right? We can go further. We can make it more. We can get more advanced, and we give you the low level, access to low level functions and the ability to extend the framework. So for even more advanced developers, they've got a path forward where they can do this crazy advanced stuff. For the less technical people, we've got other tools such as the CapIO recorder, which allows them to contribute it. So that to me was one of the main constraints too. And the other one I'll just mention quickly is that, again, it kind of goes back to what I said before. You put all this effort into developing these tests using, if you can figure out how to use these tools, then you've got to maintain them. Every time a ServiceNow version comes out, you've got to maintain it. Every time a new version of the browser comes out, you likely have to maintain it. If the tools change that you're using, you've got to make sure that it maintains. So just the effort to upkeep the framework, not even talking about the content of the test, but just the framework itself can be cost prohibitive for most people. There's a lot of things that people just aren't considering. So for us, for our tool, we handle that side. Customers handle the development of the actual individual test. That's all they really are concerned with at the end of the day. Those two are the most common, significant problems that I said from a technical standpoint.
Sure. And so when you talk about there being a lot of different options out there as far as automated testing, I think a lot of companies that we've talked to have such specific needs that they're trying to create their own solution, right? And that's sort of what goes into what you're talking about with having to maintain that solution. Every time there's a new version upgrade, there's going to be, could be hundreds of lines of code that you need to go through and adjust just for that one change. But what about you? I mean, Sabrina, are you seeing any specific barriers to just kind of getting automated testing off the ground for some of the customers you've worked with?
Yeah, so I've seen the same issues Sal has about the maintenance piece, but also the time it takes to get those test cases written in anywhere that you're going to write them, in a spreadsheet, in the tool, wherever you're going to write them. It's just that effort. And developers are not good testers. We will test what is right in front of our face, and that's about it. You don't want to rely on us to be your testers, and having a separate testing team is not common in a lot of areas. We've got some customers that think that we do all of the system and integration testings, and they ask us to do testing through all of the cycles, and they're just there to look at it and make sure it's pretty and it's meeting their needs, and not actually testing any of the functionality. But you really need an independent testing team, I think, or a tester that's not a developer, maybe a tester that's not an end user that's not going to think to test the unhappy path, right? If you just have your end users testing, you're testing, I clicked it, I'm just going to do it as I would normally order. I'm not going to try to break the system. And you need somebody in there to break the system, to make sure that those the code is solid.
Now that kind of brings me to another point, and anyone can hop in on this one. What goes into building a good test? I mean, what goes into once a company has gotten their automated testing off the ground, and they're no longer implementing, they're maintaining their automated testing practice? What goes into doing it the right way versus doing it the wrong way, and how often do you see that being done correctly?
I can give a little bit of my opinion on it. In terms of how many people do it correctly, the last part of your question, a few. I guess at the end of the day, we've seen a few customers come to us with some really well-built test plans that cover everything. But some of the things that people are not considering, like first off, when we build a test, we have a methodology for building a test. We don't just go in and start writing steps. I have even down to the vocabulary that I use a specific way of building that test. And I am very much a fan, although it's not the only way, of building tests under the given, when, then structure. Very commonly see this with in defining acceptance criteria for stories as well. If you can express a test in the current state, the changes, and then the final state, then you've got a way at least forward of thinking about how to structure the steps for the test. So that's always in the back of my mind when I'm developing a test. Then there's the specific vocabulary and things that we use, and then comes really the best practices for ServiceNow. There's certain configurations in ServiceNow, and there are specific ways to test those configurations that I found. They were the best way forward for the tests that I've built in the past. And so, having a methodology, having a lot of experience to rely on is really important in building those tests. As Sabrina mentioned too earlier, understanding that acceptance criteria, or coming into it and knowing what you have to test, is almost 90% of it. Just the things that I mentioned are the final 10%, and they're important too, to structure the test and get it into that format. Once you do that, the automation is almost an afterthought. If you can have the steps to find out, if you know what user to impersonate, if you know what things to click on and have everything, what data to use, if you've got that all to find out, building the test automation is almost an afterthought using CapIO, because the language that I use to define the test directly matches what the function would be in CapIO. Using another tool, I can't really say. It would probably take 10 times as long. Not that that's not a valid investment anyways, but you could just see there how using CapIO with that abstracted API makes it a lot easier. So that to me is what goes. Understand the requirements, have a method for building the test, and then go into automation.
So, and Sabrina, I'll throw this to you. How do you decide which of your processes to throw into a test? I mean, how do you prioritize, what to get started and actually developing that strategy?
So I guess there's a couple of different ways, but one thing I did want to say is having a separate testing team first is going to make your developers better, because they're going to push back on the developers and make sure that they're testing appropriately before they even pass it up. So I think that's important to point out, is your investment's not just in building a testing team, but it's also improving your developer skills. But where to get started is always difficult because there's so many processes that you have typically in the tool. So I don't know, you can look at it from what you're currently working on and start from there and build that out, or you can build out a test, start with your most common use process. Like if you're talking ServiceNow, a lot of customers, it's incident. Something that's simple, that gets you familiar with the tool, the testing tool that you're going to use, so that if you know that process really well, you can build it out in that tool, and it helps you learn the tool, the automated testing tool, at the same time that you're documenting your test cases with something you're familiar with. And then as you go into building out test cases for either newer tools or processes that you're not as familiar with, you at least understand the testing tool and where the different pieces connect.
Okay, great. I just want to, we're almost at the halfway mark right now. I do want to remind people, if you guys have any additional questions you want to put in there that might guide our conversation towards something specific that you might be looking for, that's still available for you guys to do that. I did see a couple questions that I was able to just respond with some quick typing that was I was able to respond in through the chat, but something that we can put in the conversation. We're obviously still happy to do that as well. So, I mean, so Sal, I know that one of the things that we've talked about before, you and I, is specifically about testing strategy in terms of some of the levels and the types of testing that people may not always be considering there. What do you have to say in terms of, you know, how that works in ServiceNow and how people can approach that?
Yeah, so you know, typically in testing, there are various levels. You know, starting at the very bottom, you know, you've got unit, system integration, and acceptance level testing, and that, you know, outside of ServiceNow, that's usually pretty clearly defined. You know, there's you know, really obvious lines around where that testing should be done, by whom, and, you know, what it should look like. On ServiceNow, not so much, because we're not developing ServiceNow itself. We're developing customizations on top of it. What I've had to do is kind of adapt those terms for use as, you know, us as developers or configurers of the ServiceNow platform. So when I'm talking about testing strategy, the first thing I want to understand with the customers, you know, what type of testing do you do now? And, you know, then I can start to make suggestions about where they'd like to go. You know, as Sabrina kind of alluded to, everyone pretty much does acceptance testing, and they really focus on the happy paths there. They focus on, because it's, you know, sometimes it's just the end user doing it. They focus on that positive path, nothing goes wrong. And, you know, once they see that pass, you know, as far as they're concerned, it's all working. So a lot of people have that in mind when they're doing testing, but there's other types that I try to turn people on to. Integration type testing doesn't really 100% map to ServiceNow. When you do a test of functionality from the UI, you're really testing the different integrations between the subsystems. So I kind of leave that one off. There are certain examples that I won't get into where that kind of comes into play, but the one that I do try to focus people on, especially, is the system level testing. And it's, you know, that to me is a big part of the portfolio of a good testing strategy. And that's really, you know, as adapted for ServiceNow, that's really looking at the changes at the specific types of configurations in ServiceNow. As I mentioned before, you know, client scripts have their own way to be tested. UI policies have their own way to be tested. And so putting the changes into those buckets specifically, first of all, it gives you a clear target about what to do, because you've got all the records in ServiceNow. You've got a list of UI policies or business rules and everything. So you've got your target. You know what to do if you're kind of building or going against a backlog of existing configurations. And then the specific strategies for each of those. There's only, you know, maybe there's probably only like 30 different patterns that we see for testing those over and over. So if you can get those established and understand those patterns, it makes building those tests very easy. So, you know, system combined with an acceptance test is a pretty effective strategy. Some people like to go a step lower to almost like a unit level, and this one I've really had to sort of redefine for ServiceNow, and you know, specifically the types of changes that I would target with the unit test would be back-end server type changes, a business rule, a script include, something that can be tested with server-side code. And we've built a method for building unit tests for that. It's really it's like another level of maturity above. Once you've achieved the system test, then I would kind of advise, if people are interested, adding unit testing to their strategy. So it's those types of, it's, you know, identifying the types of testing that you want to do, and then, you know, it's more logistic things. What environment do we want to test against? What's our cadence for testing? What are our triggers? When do we do the test? How does it integrate with our SDLC process? Those are other questions that kind of feed into it. But if you go into it just, you know, just saying that I've got these manual tests that I want to automate, you're kind of already, you know, putting yourself a little bit more behind than you'd want to. You should really approach it as, you know, what is my overall strategy, and then how can I possibly how can I reuse what I've already built to fit into one of those buckets. And it's just a matter of efficiency. If you have it defined that way, if you've got the strategy built out, building the tests are a lot easier in my experience, and it cuts the development time down by a huge factor. If you try to cram everything into one test, it's going to take longer. It's going to grow exponentially. The more steps you have, the harder it's going to be to develop. So I try to put it into those buckets so that we've got a good starting point, and it's easy to maintain.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think when you're identifying the testing types, you need to put definitions around them. I've seen organizations call things different. The same, I would call it a unit test, and they've called it, something integration testing or something. So you just make sure when you're defining your testing types, you are also, when you're identifying, you're also defining what they mean, and they're the same across the board at your organization.
Yeah, that's why I say I had to take these terms and just use them. Just put a definition to them, because testing, especially, like, these definitions are all over the place. Sometimes people will call it acceptance, end-to-end testing, regression testing. These kind of all technically true,
right?
But having that strict definition around it also makes it easier. Like, if you got those guardrails, then it makes it a lot easier to test, I think.
I think that's
and what's required from your audit team perspective. Yep.
I think that's only further evidence that this is still kind of the Wild West in terms of automated testing in ServiceNow, because you're right. I remember very early on when we were first talking about our product CapIO, people would say, "Can you automate UAT with it?" And the answer was like, "Well, only if your user is a robot." Right? You can't really automate a human being.
Right.
UAT is going to be a user. And so that's just.
I was being a little bit cheeky with that one too. I mean, acceptance testing is one thing. Having the user accept it is another thing. So technically, maybe the same thing, but yeah, I was kind of being a little bit silly with that.
Sure. So, kind of jumping back a little bit, when we talk about trying to create a testing team and trying to get non-developers involved with the testing process. I know one of the obstacles to that is, especially if you're using a tool like Selenium or something that you've built yourself, there's a coding element involved, or, like we've mentioned, if you use a different tool, your admins need to learn a whole new set of code, a whole new language to approach that. How do you think, how big of an obstacle do you think that is for companies, and what do you think people can do to overcome that?
It's a huge roadblock. I mean, like I said, that may prevent people from even starting it. If you don't fully research everything, which again is in and of itself its own time constraint, you may end up looking at tools and just in the face of it, they just may look too complex to even get started. I know when we were initially building out CapIO, I probably tried at least half a dozen frameworks and different types of technologies to I guess to prototype and build some of the earlier versions of the system. So it's a big deal. It is a big deal getting started, and it is a big deal upkeeping it. So again, we try to provide that spectrum. We try to provide different tools and paths forward so that everyone can contribute to that test writing process, because you're gonna get developers who are really familiar with the individual changes and configurations, but they may lack the overall big picture. Right? They may be so focused on writing one individual activity for a workflow definition or a workflow that they kind of lose sight of the big picture. And frankly speaking, you don't really need to have them keep that entirely in their mind either. On the flip side, the business analysts and application owners know the end-to-end process really well, but they don't have really any sense of how the individual changes or the individual activities in a definition work. So providing them a way to get input into test writing was really important too, from my perspective, to get that both levels, or talking it from both levels up and down. And we wanted to provide them a tool to contribute to it as well. At the end of the day, it still lives as code. It is it's an automated test, and I believe that it should be code on a screen at the end of the day. But how you get there, doesn't need to be just writing it. There's other methods, and so that was important to provide, every path possible that we could.
And also, I think a lot of organizations now are starting to want to involve, like Sal said, their business analysts or specialists into the process. It provides a different perspective for one, and it's also just how do we provide the tool for both sides of the spectrum to kind of meet in the middle and get the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sal, actually, at this point, this might be a good time for us to show off. I know that we're a little bit past the half-hour mark at the moment, but I know we wanted to show off some of the features specific to CapIO, directly related to what we were just talking about in terms of some of these, common issues that people are having. So I'll go ahead and pass presenter over to you if you're ready.
Yeah, and while you're passing that, Tim, a question did come in about the tests in CapIO, how they're affected by patches and upgrades. I can respond to that real quickly here. The tests that you write within CapIO, and just I guess I'll try to make it general too. They're very much affected by the way. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. The upgrades themselves or patches definitely have a lot of changes that occur in the front end and somewhat in the back end too of ServiceNow. So if you were just to write a test using another platform or tool, if you were to use Selenium itself, then you're on the hook to maintain that. With CapIO, because we abstract the way you write the test, we don't put it at the very low level. We kind of give you another level up, something that we've written in more of a business level language. Because that is abstracted, we have the ability to change the way that code functions between different versions. So the end result for you is that your tests are essentially future proof. If you use the CapIO commands, Cerna does the maintenance for those between the different versions, and the test will just continue to run. Really, the only caveat to that is, if you've gone and you've written some more advanced code that tests customizations, custom UI pages or custom UI macros, or maybe something special in the service portal, something that doesn't use a CapIO command, that would need to be looked at. In a lot of cases, it doesn't get broken by a ServiceNow upgrade because it's custom. You don't need to, unless ServiceNow changes the way UI pages work or service portal works, those will continue to run. But the other stuff, everything else that you've written, will continue to work. We do all the maintenance for it. We push out a patch, and that contains the updated versions of the functions. And when you're ready, you just toggle between the different versions. You tell it London or Kingston, and it runs the appropriate function in the back end. And when I share my screen here, I'll give you a quick example of what that looks like here. Should see this pop up in a second. Just a ServiceNow form. Tim, let me know if you don't see that.
Yep, I can see everything fine.
So this is ServiceNow on our basic incident form here, and the CapIO recorder is right now available as an extension to Chrome. It's just installed through that Chrome browser extension store. I think they call it the web store or something now. Once it's enabled here, you'll get this little robot icon, and when you're on a ServiceNow instance here, you can click to enable this, and what this will do is just drop in and add this recording toolbar here. Make this a little bit bigger. This toolbar has all the buttons and feedback for the recording of these test cases in here, and it's got first of all the button to turn on and off recording. This is right here. When I'm ready, I can click to enable that. The rest of the interface really shows, what you're interacting with, what was the command that was recorded, and then we've also got a series, depending on the element, of suggested actions, and that's how you drop in things like validations. Is this the correct value, or is the options correct for this list, and so forth here. That'll be dependent on exactly what you're interacting with. This is very much different from a regular recorder. Other development or test automation platforms, some of them do have recorders, and they're very I just want to say dumb or basic. They capture everything at just a very low level. that's okay, but what happens is you end up having to go back and cull and remove out so many extra commands that it almost becomes easier to just flip it around and write it from scratch. So we didn't want that in CapIO Recorder. So we put a lot of logic in the back end to only capture what's correct, only capture the exact command. And of course, because it's abstracted, we had to do that to get the right commands recorded. So just as a quick example here, the first step is I want to get my interface in just the right way so I can start this test. And usually that just means everything is zipped up over here. It can really be on any page or the home page. I'll start recording. This will turn red just to let me know that that is recording on. And you can already see when I'm starting to hover and interact with things, I start to get these suggested actions. Those will change, remember, based on the element. Then I just want to execute my test as I normally would. And I want to remember too that the setup of this and everything needs to be captured as well. This is why having that defined is really important. I want to know how I can get my system just in that right spot to do the test. So if I'm wanting to test something on the incident form, for instance, I'm probably going to want to navigate to the incident application, go to the incident module that I care about, in this case, just to create new form. As I'm doing that, these actions are being captured on the back within this recorder here. And the first view that I get as I'm doing this, just the plain English description of it. We wanted people in the recorder, when they're recording these, to get a representation of the test case captured the way they would say it. Expand the incident application. Maybe it's a little bit wordy, but you get the idea here that these will be the actual actions here. You can toggle or change these. You can update these values. You can reorder these or delete them if you want. So you'll start by capturing those. If I want, I can come in here. It'll actually capture filling out the form here too. So I can come in, populate a value. If things are automatically filled in here, then it will capture those as well. Can be kind of sensitive. So if I don't care about that, I can just go ahead and remove those steps. Get all these out of here. Let me go ahead and save the form here. So once this is done here, once I've captured all my actions, everything that I'm going to do as the end user, I'll probably stop recording, and then I'll start to bring in any validations. If I'm just doing an acceptance test, there might not be many validations that I need to do. If I'm doing a system type test here where I want to test something specific, client script or business rule, these might have specific validations that I need to do. And you can see when I click on something like a field, I get lots of options here. I can validate everything, every attribute about that field here, and I just click to enable these. It just drops it in. Those are now added to my script here. When I'm done, I got a couple options. I can save it, and that'll add it to my test cases list here. I can copy it if I want to bring this out and play it back in our other tool, CapIO Mini. I might do that. I might take this and bring it directly into our CapIO application, which is our test repository where these are finally stored. I can do that with just this copy script button, or I can export it directly too if I want. There's an export feature to bring everything into the CapIO application. So that's the basic process here, and this will capture, for 80% of test cases, this is enough. It's just navigating, filling out forms, and validating values. Then this is the tool for you. No development is required here. For anything beyond this, where a developer might be required, I would take this if I'm a business analyst or subject matter or an application owner. I might take this and give this to a developer and say, this is pretty much what I want here. This is the broad strokes. I just want to add something custom here. I want to go to this related search results, or there's not really many customizations on here, but if there were something custom, I might have that developer add that, that part in, or I might say, this is something I do a lot. Can I just get a function for this? And the developer may take this and extend the framework and build a custom function for something like this, creating a basic incident. So there's a lot of, there's a few different steps forward here that we can take, but you can see how this would definitely speed up development. Even sometimes, even though I know it and I wrote a good portion of it, sometimes this is still easier for me to do for this, basic stuff, to just come in and record it than it is to write it from scratch. You've got to, in some cases, know the field names and everything. If it's a new system, then I may just go ahead and use the recorder to get started as well.
And you're not saying that you would need a developer every single time. That's really more along the lines of if you have someone like a business process consultant or a process manager, or even an advanced user who comes and puts a test like this together, if they needed that special level of customization, there are options there, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it follows the 80-20 rule. Like 80% of the test cases are going to be easily done through this and recordable, and then 20% will have customizations or things that we want to do special. So yeah, for the most part, this gets you most of the way there, and we're just trying to reduce the effort. We're not saying that automation with CapIO is free. There's a little bit of effort that's involved there, but it's not nearly what it would be if you were building your own system. And the end result is, this is, again, the easy stuff is easily done. The hard stuff is, I wouldn't say hardly done, but we kind of de-escalate that to make a medium level effort. We give them paths forward for the more advanced stuff as well.
Okay, great.
I think one of the things to point out too is the ability to stop and start, like you showed, Sal. So making sure you break your test cases down. Like if you're going to do validation on your impact and urgency priority matrix, you're going to want your own test cases for that, and not build it into the test case that validates that you can submit an incident. Because if that changes, you only have to change it. You change that sub-test case and not have to re-record everything for creation of an incident, right?
Yeah, that's really important. I want to make sure we say that again here. Those are two different things in the back end. From a system level test, to me, that's two different tests.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. I would not cram those things in there, because once you've done that, if the test breaks for the impact and urgency and you're still trying to validate that location was set, it's going to fail. It fails at the first thing. So it's really important to keep those separate. Also, it's just so much easier. Like, just to put some numbers around it here, and I don't take it like this, your mileage may vary here, but to write a test case to validate one specific thing, like a client script, it's like 5 minutes of effort. I know what it is. If I'm writing that client script right now and I write that test case at the same time, it's like 5 minutes. You go in, it may be something very similar. You might copy another test case to start that. You might record it here. And I'm sorry, this kind of leaves the discussion of the recorder, and it's a little bit more general, but to build that test case to just validate that location was set, that's like three commands here. So that's 5 minutes worth of work, and keeping it separate makes it that way. If you try to make one big long test to validate everything, now just running the test might take 5 minutes. So you're certainly not going to get that level of efficiency there. Sorry, Tim, I didn't mean to derail that, but I think that was important.
No, well, and we are past the 45-minute mark, but for anyone that's still here, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind showing also some of the specific commands that we have that are specific to ServiceNow and CapIO that really is, addressing, automated testing specifically for ServiceNow. What are some of the unique solutions that we have there?
Well, just the most common ones, right? The navigation here has its own set of commands. So going to expanding an application and going to a module, right? Those are obviously things that are specific to ServiceNow. So there's a whole set of commands here just for working with the left-hand nav. Fields too. Fields, and especially variables and service catalogs, are pretty complex here. If you were to do this from scratch here, each of these fields, each of these different types is their own strategy for how you would set these, right? Setting up, if you're just working with a basic HTML form, it's all text, and there's commands built into the various frameworks to do that. But setting a reference field, for instance, in ServiceNow, is a combination of like 3 or 4 different fields, or there's visible fields, hidden fields, there's pop-ups here, there's recent selections, and the search, the autocomplete are all, they're all functionality of that field, and you've got to consider that when you write that, the automation for this particular field. Also, not to mention that depending on how this field is configured, if there's an ACL, if there's a client script or UI policy, that slightly changes the HTML. So setting a field value is deceptively complex here, and so we've got just a single command to do it. It's very complex on the back end, but from the perspective of the person writing or recording the test, it all boils down to a single command, just set field value. Same thing with the get side. If I want to get the display value or the value of a field, lots of different ways that can happen. So we made it a single function to be multi-purpose for all those variables. in a service catalog are even more complex. There's more types of variables and questions that can happen there. And they don't really have a good system like a column name or anything. So it's really complex on that end. But this is what it looks like here. You know, the function name or what you would do mirrors what the action would be in ServiceNow. And that's what we tried to do here. And there are, I think there's over 400 commands now that we've got for ServiceNow. Again, probably 20% of the ones that you use day to day, but there's things for notifications and knowledge base and service portal and stuff that are built into that people will need to use and follow the same pattern. Try to make it easy, make it something that you can remember, and similar to what the action would be in ServiceNow.
Great, fantastic. Well, since we are a little bit past the mark right now, let me go ahead. I'm going to take the screen back, if that's okay with you. Can you guys see my screen again?
Sure.
That sounds like
there
a
it
no.
is.
Oh, you got it?
Now it's showing up. Yeah, that's good.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone that stuck around for joining the podcast. Again, we really appreciate everyone that joins these on a regular basis and all the new people that have started this month as well. Again, if you want to see more content like this that we've done in the past, you can always go to our YouTube channel or to our website and click on the resources tab and scroll through our webinars and podcasts and see what we've done there. Follow us on LinkedIn if you want the latest news from us. If you want to see when these events are happening before they happen, that's a good way for you to get in contact with us and see what we're doing on social media there, because we're a company and we use LinkedIn. But you can also, if you have questions, go to CernaSolutions.com. Go to info@CernaSolutions.com for email, or you can contact us at the phone number there. If you have any other questions, or if you guys want to see more about CapIO, if you guys have some questions about automated testing, we'd love to talk with you more and have this conversation with you and your team. But right now, thank you guys for joining us, Sal, Sabrina, Angel. It was great talking with you guys.
That was fun. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
All right, have a good day.